Hey, how's it going, universe? It's Shaun from Zoobox, and we got another movie review today on our constant quest for daily content. We're going to be talking more movies, and today we're going to be talking about 1997's The Devil's Advocate. We're not going to be talking about Insomnia or Seven, which would be worth talking about for sure. But no, we're going to go with The Devil's Advocate today because I watched it this morning. Now, I've always had a soft spot for this movie. Growing up, I've always had a thing for courtroom dramas, lawyer movies. Probably going back to when I was a kid and I saw To Kill a Mockingbird. It was something I was always fascinated with. And even in the years gone by, I even thought about, like, oh, maybe I'd like to be a lawyer. Maybe I'd like to go to law school. You know, those dreams left pretty early. But probably by the time I was like 15. Because I wanted to make movies. That was the thing I wanted to do from then on. And but I've also was raised Catholic. And so I've always had a fascination with kind of stories about Satan on Earth or the devil and Faustian tales, you know, things that mirror things like Paradise Lost. I was really into literature when I was a kid, and the first one I ever read was The Divine Comedy, Dante Alighieri's, you know, seminal work about, you know, going down into the depths of hell, going down the circles of hell. And so I've always just had a thing for him. And this movie is like the perfect synthesis of those two ideas put together, you know? So let's just get into it. Let's just start talking about it in general. Now, if you haven't seen the movie, I'm probably going to speak pretty freely. It's an older movie. It's 1997. If you've never seen the movie, I guess what I would say, if you want to stop the video now, I would say The Devil's Advocate is a really good time. It's kind of campy. It is and it isn't self-aware. It does take itself a little too serious, I think. And that is not really a detriment, I think, this far removed from when it came out, because now you can kind of see it in its proper context. And it makes it kind of part of the fun of watching it, actually. It's got some decent performances. Al Pacino swinging for the fences, doing his Al Pacino thing, monologuing, kind of his post-Heat acting style, you know? Because a lot of people generally judge Al Pacino from like before Heat and after Heat. He gives like this big, really big performance. And actually, as the legend goes, not a lot of people realize this, but there was a subplot where his character was addicted to coke. So he's always taking bumps of coke. And that informed his performance, but they cut it out of the movie. So it's not there. So it just seems like he's just like a maniac. But it still works, though. Still, it's a great performance. Heat's probably actually one of my all-time favorite movies. I look forward to talking about Heat at some point. But as far as this movie goes, you know, it's a decent allegorical morality play kind of story. It's pretty simple at the end of the day. And yeah, so I revisited this morning with more of a critical eye, the thought of making a video about it. And what would I say? What are some of the things I like about this movie, just off the top? I think that Keanu Reeves is actually pretty good in this. It was at the perfect point in his career where I think he was comfortable with himself as an actor. Because if you see some of his earlier films, some of them are rough. They're kind of hit or miss. But I think for some reason, I think he just either tapped into, whether by accident or not, the tone of the movie. And because he plays like kind of this hot shot Florida lawyer, and his line delivery is like a little caricature-y, but not in a way that I think complements the film overall. Same thing with Al Pacino's performance, which I assume is probably a little more intentional on his part. He's having fun. He's being big. He's chewing the scenery. I mean, the last 25 minutes of the movie are almost just a big monologue by Al Pacino, and he tears it up. That's where the famous "I'm a fan of man," him yelling about God and about the nature of man and how he's been man's biggest supporter. And it's interesting, but it makes the movie very watchable. Like I said, it's part of the fun. And I think everybody's pretty good. I think Charlize Theron, I mean, this is an earlier role for her. She's really good. I think the movie does her character justice. You know, she's not like a damsel. She's not just like she's like a victim, and a lot of awful things happen to her as the powers that be kind of conspire to gaslight her and you see kind of the dynamics of her and her husband's relationship and how he's kind of already pulling away. And a lot of that is motivated by his ego and this constant desire to climb the ladder, to be the best. I win. I'm a fucking lawyer. I win. That's what I do. I don't lose. Because that's, the framing of it is that he's a hotshot lawyer, a little bit morally compromised. He has his first big case where he knows the guy is guilty, this guy that's a pedophile, and he decides to win the case, basically. And then that's when he gets a call up to the big leagues to go to New York and become part of this elite firm. And he does the same thing. And so it's a series of compromises that he has to make from a moral standpoint. And he doesn't just do it in the courtroom. It's something that bleeds over into his life and the attention that he gives his wife and like the decisions that he makes, his desires, isn't what he wants. Connie Nielsen is another lawyer that works at the firm. She's kind of like this, model-esque hot lawyer lady with the slick back hair and everything. Charlize Theron is the girl next door. And he just wants part of that fast life, and it kind of just proceeds from there. What I would say about the movie, I think as a criticism, it's too long, because it does get a little redundant at some point. Like I said, it's a morality play, and it kind of teaches you the same lesson over and over and over again. Like the seduction period is really extended. And it's not something I think you might notice maybe your first time watching it, but if you've seen it as many times as I have, I've probably seen this movie like 25 or 30 times. I mean, I used to watch it all the time as a kid. And it does play out a little long in the tooth because you just feel like, well, we get it. We understand. Because it's the descent is slow, but at the same time, it's not. It's slow by the way that the story is constructed, not necessarily because of the things that actually happen or the reactions to things that happen. So I think you could have lost at least a good 20 minutes of this movie. It does not need to be 2.5 hours long. Sorry, Taylor. Sorry, buddy. Pal. I'm sorry. But I like its perspective, though. It's interesting. It's, these kind of movies, these kind of allegories are, they're slightly old hat, I guess. But this is one of the ones that sticks out in my memory the most in terms of the movies of the past 30 years. Because it is like a big Hollywood production, but it also feels like a small drama at the same time. These are the kind of movies that they don't really get made anymore. Like this was a big thing. It had a big star, had a big budget. The mid-90s. Thrillers and these kind of movies and actually courthouse dramas, they were kind of a thing in the 90s. And this feels like the culmination of it, right? Because all courtroom dramas in some way are basically about good and evil and what's going to triumph. And are you willing to compromise or what's your integrity level, Mr. Lawyer? That's really, at the end of the day, a lot of them can be reduced down to those kind of things. So it kind of makes sense in a logical sense that you would do a Faustian tale with that dynamic. I think it does a great job for the most part, It's a really fun movie to watch, and a lot of that, like I said, is anchored by the performances. Al Pacino specifically is obviously having a lot of fun. Apparently, though, from what I was reading some of the trivia, that he was allegedly a little difficult. He did not jive with Taylor Hackford's style, which is not crazy to hear because Taylor Hackford's kind of a journeyman, but not in a way that I think is good. Like there are some journeyman directors that are impressive. There's a director, John Boorman. He's a journeyman director, like a working director, but his filmography is so broad, like the types of things he tackles, the kinds of movies he makes. He can make, a detective drama one movie, and then the next movie he makes a movie about World War II pilots that crash on the same island, and then they have to learn how to survive. They have to learn how to get along. I think it's Hell in the Pacific. I watched it not too long ago. It's really good. Also, and then he makes Excalibur, makes Zardoz. Like, you know, just a really well-rounded expert craftsman that could touch all different kinds of subjects. He was just a good storyteller. He just knew how to put a story together regardless of the genre. Taylor Hackford, not so much. So it makes sense to me that he would probably butt heads with somebody like Pacino, because there is a little bit of a blandness to this, an anonymous feeling. It's not the direction that really pulls you along in the movie. It's not even really so much the particulars of the story. It really is the performances. Because it doesn't feel like it's authored. It doesn't feel like it comes from a vision. Which is too bad, because I think in more capable hands, this would be like an all-timer. You wouldn't need to have tons of caveats about what, like about how to appreciate it. I guess also Joel Schumacher was signed onto this for a while with Brad Pitt as the lead. And but I guess because they couldn't find like a Satan, they couldn't find John Milton. The financing fell through, and then it came back a couple years later, and then what we got, and then that's what we got. It would have been interesting to see that version, a Joel Schumacher version, because Joel Schumacher is another guy who's kind of like a little bit anonymous, like not a bad director, and he's touched a lot of different kind of genres and subgenres in his career, like The Lost Boys, The Vanishing, things like that, Tigerland, Phone Booth, Batman and Robin, Batman Forever. So he's another one of these kind of like journeyman guys that you hire to do a job. So I wonder, but it still probably would have had like a populist bent to it, like an entertaining movie bent to it. He's not like a deep guy, not a deep filmmaker that layers his movie with all sorts of subtext, because there is no subtext in this movie. It is all surface. It is like watching an episode of The Twilight Zone. There's not any, like, it just tells you the subtext. It literally speaks the subtext to you. And sometimes that's okay. I mean, I'm not a big, it's kind of a modern thing where all movies are like that. But when it's every once in a while and you have something like this, that's such a clear allegory for just good versus evil and your inner struggle and dealing with the ambition and vanity, it's okay that it's on the surface for me. I will say a few of the story points that I thought were completely unnecessary. You know, at the beginning of the third act, or in the middle of the third act, you find out that Keanu Reeves' character is Al Pacino's son. And I thought that was really unnecessary. You could have literally told the same story and not had to have that. It just seemed like an unnecessary like bit of complication, because it's not really what the story's about. And then it just kind of feels, I guess it was maybe to add more of a supernatural thing to it about like, why is this person so good at being a lawyer? How has he never lost a case? Well, apparently it was John Milton conspiring behind the scenes with his magic, or whatever you want to call it, like kind of paving the way for his success. So there you go. Especially this time I was watching, I was like, this doesn't need to be there. Like, it just doesn't, we don't need that kind of direct connection like that for the story to just be the same thing. In fact, it kind of takes the power away from the allegory, the morality play, because now it can't be just anybody that's susceptible to this. No, now it's literally got to be the devil's children. I think to me it would be way more interesting if it was just a story about like somebody that's just a good lawyer. He's just good, and that makes him vulnerable to these kind of psychic attacks and these kind of temptations. You know, a young guy coming up is the best at what he does. He's got these opportunities, and where does his old life end and his new life begin, or can those two worlds coexist? Not so much. I think that kind of fucks it up at the end there, in terms of just, you know, the cohesion of the whole thing and the dramatic reach of it. It kind of stops it because of that. I mean, but like I said, it's so on the nose. I don't know if it really matters. It doesn't affect the enjoyment of the movie, I suppose. But this time I watched it, I was like, nah, we could get rid of that. But it didn't stop me from enjoying the movie. I still enjoy it. I think part of it is definitely nostalgia. Just having watched it so many times as a teenager. I'm curious what somebody, like, if they had never seen it and they were like 30 years old, what they would think of The Devil's Advocate today. I'm really curious how it would hold up to somebody that's not already like familiar with it. I don't know if it would work, because just there isn't a lot to latch onto other than just the surface level stuff. It's not a deep movie at all. It's just like, have integrity, do the right thing. Don't get swept up in your own vanity and ego. There you go. That's The Devil's Advocate. Another thing I didn't actually like was the conclusion of the film. So at the end of the movie, Keanu Reeves is about to mount his stepsister so they can make the Antichrist for some reason. And then he just pulls out a gun. He's like, free will, right? And then shoots himself in the head. Fucking brain splatter ever. It's actually a really kind of a cool, slightly effect shot. His fucking brains are coming out in slow motion as he slowly falls, and Al Pacino's freaking out, and everything gets set on fire. And then it zooms out. It's like a close-up shot of a flame, and then it zooms out, and then you're back at the beginning of the movie where he was like having a crisis of conscience in the bathroom about representing this pedophile, this guy that he just like suddenly realized was guilty. And then after that, like, a reporter comes up and is like, hey, this is a big deal, because he decides not to. He says to the judge, he's like, I can't represent my client. He's like, you know what this means? Yeah, I'll be disbarred. And then he goes away. He's leaving, and all these reporters want to talk to him. And then, I don't know, a reporter that's his friend, a beat reporter for the courthouse, approaches him and says, hey, man, I want to write a spread. A lawyer with a conscience. This is a huge story, massive. And he's reluctantly says, okay. Because he becomes a slave to vanity, and then it morphs into Al Pacino's face, and you see that, it's Al Pacino. He's still there. Get another shot at bat. Which just kind of takes away the power of the movie. Honestly, I really wish he would have just killed himself, and that would be the end of it. It feels very tacked on. It feels very Hollywood. But I suppose that is the kind of movie it is. It's a studio movie from the mid-90s. Got to have some kind of happy-ish ending, even if we know the devil's going to try again. The devil's always going to be there to tempt you. I suppose you could say that about the ending. The persistence of the devil. The persistence of vanity and ego. And just because he didn't get you here doesn't mean he'll not get you in a different way. So there is that. But it just doesn't feel necessary. Like, why can't the devil just lose and then that's the end of the movie? Maybe more of a tragic end, but so what? Who cares? It's already a dark movie. It's dealing with a lot of dark shit. Just superficially. The kind of cases that he takes throughout the film. All the stuff with Charlize Theron is super intense sometimes. Like one of the last, like when she kills herself in the mental institution, like, holy shit, that's an intense scene. And that's why I give Keanu some credit for his performance here. I thought it's actually pretty good. One of his better ones from the time period. Certainly. Now it's kind of it's acceptable to like Keanu Reeves. Back then, he was a little bit more contentious. He was. I remember I had a friend who just fucking hated him so much. Like, he couldn't even like The Matrix. When The Matrix came out, we were teenagers. We were kids, man. The Matrix was the bomb. I remember when I first saw The Matrix. Great time. Great time. It's not until you get older that you're like, oh, The Matrix is okay. Some of it has not aged super well. But that's a tale for another time. We're already getting long here. So yeah, that's my review of The Devil's Advocate. I'd give it a solid 7 out of 10. 3.5 out of 5. I enjoy it. I don't think it's going to be for everybody. It is kind of shallow, but as kind of a piece of 90s ephemera, it's worth a watch. It's worth checking out. All right, thanks a lot for watching and listening, everybody. If you would like to know more about Zoobox, if you want to stay up to date with these reviews and also the regular podcast. And then we actually do have a movie podcast called Zoobox Goes to the Movies. Those, hit iTunes feeds and whatnot, so you can download audio versions and take them with you. And those are way more, long form, conversational. So check those out. All the links will be in the description. And we'll talk to you again tomorrow when we talk about something. I'm not sure yet, but we will figure it out. All right. Thanks for watching.